one of the very last words of Aida when she was leaving the stage was making a comment about the differences between the two regions. And I tend to agree with her, the fact that a number of countries in the region I cover are already the well-established EU member states, put them in a slightly different context of the policy and the push for the advancements of renewables. But I think the key point here is that for both North Macedonia and Romania, this is not the beginning in any way of renewable energy journey. And that journey is linked to a number of pledges and ambitions that have been formally committed to in the past. I would like to start with that question about targets and challenges. North Macedonia has committed to a very, very ambitious decarbonization targets. And in a way has set up a good example for the countries in the region to follow the super ambitious paths. So my question is, what are the main challenges for the implementation of North Macedonia's NACP goals, and how do you view these challenges now in light of the ongoing energy crisis? And obviously, that questions go to you, dear Minister.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. I'd like to thank, first of all, the Atlantic Council and EBRD and our host, Turkey, for inviting us to this forum, this panel. We have ambitious targets, and we're actually still continuing to be dedicated to those. You mentioning us being maybe a role for the region. First of all, I'd like to explain that the Republic of North Macedonia, we like to say we are small, compact, but full of surprises, and we'd like to actually be one of the countries which wants to be more ambitious. Our targets are based on the NDC to the Paris Agreement, are decreasing the greenhouse gas emissions by 51% by 2030 compared to the 1990 levels. And considering that we're also part of Europe, we want to, of course, be targeting for the carbon neutrality of 2050. This hasn't been done, of course. First of all, I'd like to openly say it wasn't a decision we took very easily. Of course, I, as the Minister of Environment and in charge of the strategy for the future on energy, was arguing that we have to pass it. There's certain investments that need to be made. Quite a bit of it will have to come from the central budget. However, the rest actually can be stimulated in the private sector. And we think if you stimulate the private sector, we have created 63 different measures which are implementable. And one of them, for example, of course, we all speak about it, energy efficiency. As we all say, the cheapest and the cleanest energy is always the one you don't use. So we need to invest in energy efficiency. However, unfortunately, as you mentioned, the challenges are not only long-term. We will remain dedicated to these targets. However, the imminent future is unfortunately a lot more challenging than the 2030 targets. We're facing a winter and potentially a couple of years of further disruption. We unfortunately, even though we have these ambitious targets, we're unfortunately using more coal now than we used in the past, and unfortunately we have to. However, though, that doesn't mean we're actually deviating away from the strategy of diversifying our energy resources. We are not only investing ourselves, we're actually supporting the foreign investment to be invested into renewable energy. These targets we've actually thought about, the 1.5 degree, we have to keep to these targets. I think especially in the Western Balkan region, the last few years we've seen floods, fires, which unfortunately in the past we were speaking about mitigation. Now adaptation has become a reality for all of us. So the problem with the fact is now we've accepted that it's happened, and it's happening. We need to prepare ourselves for the future. And when we speak about adaptation, of course, it's not the easiest debate you want to have with the Ministry of Finance, because they see it as a cost. We see it as a cost prevention. We call it a damage prevention in the future. These targets will have to be kept. We will do our part. As I said, we're small, compact, but I think what's actually more important, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I think one has to be realistic that the Western Balkans are countries which have not gone through the whole full industrialization cycle, whereas certain developed countries have. And in this instance, I think it is very important that the developed countries need to support the developing countries to achieve these targets. We're speaking about technologies which are costly. However, though, if there's a share of technology, we might be able to actually decrease the costs for us. And when we speak about investing into renewable energy and moving away from the conventional energy sector.
I would like to probe you a little bit on a few things you've mentioned earlier. You've mentioned private sector. I promise to come back to that a little bit later during our discussion. But you also mentioned energy efficiency. Now, we've heard a lot about renewables over the last 2 days. We've heard a little bit about energy efficiency as well. And I wouldn't like to make it a technical discussion in any way. But what do you think the policymakers could or should do to promote energy efficiency among the average people? I mean, someone who is the, a usual consumer of energy in terms of household consumption. Are there any real-life examples that you can bring up from North Macedonia by any chance?
Of course. I mean, the thing as you said, I think a lot of the countries in the Western Balkans have, unfortunately, older infrastructure where energy efficiency was not really being viewed upon when they were built. Now, what we're doing, we're actually subsidizing investments in the insulation, which is a key. However, though, what we did recently is we changed the rule book in our country that if you put up to 6 kilowatts of solar photovoltaic panels on your rooftop, and if you're overproducing from your needs, you're going to be allowed to sell it into the grid again. This is for the homes. Of course, as I said earlier, there's also subsidies when it comes to using the heat pumps, which are a lot more energy efficient. And for the small and micro enterprises, we're doing the same thing from the 40 kilowatt are allowed to be resold into the grid again. These are the key little things. However, though, I think what we need to do, and maybe it's not just in my country, we need to be more, raise an awareness to the citizens that these investments are not costs, they are initial costs, but they actually are gains in the medium to long term. These are to their benefit. However, though, we need to find a mechanism how they can finance it, because the ones that have the most energy inefficient homes, unfortunately, are the ones that are mostly economically challenged in that sense. So the idea is to actually step up with higher subsidies for that category of the economic, or that society level, so to speak.
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more. You've mentioned heat pumps, super exciting subject, talked about across Europe these days, but we need to move on a little bit, and I would like to jump over to our second panelist, and in the context of the ongoing discussion about the acceleration of renewables, I would like to make a very quick return back the memory lane a decade or so when Romania was embarking on the renewables path and was one of the few countries back then that decided to introduce a green certificate system for renewables. Now, my native Poland did the same. We had mixed experience with this system, but I understand that these days Romania is working on the new support system for renewables based on contracts for difference. So I would like to ask you about those policy measures, which may include the CFD auctions. What is the current level of advancements of that work, and what is the expected size of the renewable energy investment that are supposed to be delivered under the new CFD system that is about to be introduced?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, let me say hello to the audience, and again, thank you very much for the invitation to participate on behalf of the Ministry of Energy from Romania. Indeed, 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, we introduced a support scheme based on the green certificates that at that time supported investments into renewable. This is why we have the biggest onshore wind project in southeastern Europe. It's a 700 megawatt installed power wind capacity that is producing energy in the Dobroja area of our country, an important investment, and several other investments were attracted by this support scheme. We saw that this support scheme worked until the level of not being so much interrupted. There has been many legislative changes in the support scheme framework, and this is why several years we did not see an appetite for investments in our country. What the CFD does...
Do you think, sorry for jumping in, but do you think there is a lesson learned that others can benefit from?
This is why I'm saying this, because we have to learn, and this is why CFD is going to be able to provide a more stable and predictive framework for investors. As you all know, we work at this together for this implementing this framework. So we're hoping that in 2023 we'll have the first auction for capacities financed through the CFD system. We are looking to increase our shares of renewable, and we are very ambitious in doing this. If we easily reached our target in 2020, the target was for our country 24% of renewable from the total consumption. We are aiming to increase this by 2030 at more than 30%. So this means that we have to add around 7 gigawatts of installed power only in renewable capacities. Very ambitious plans. Let me say that not only from the CFD we will finance these investments. We have at our disposal the Recovery and Resilience Plan, which has a total budget of 1.6 billion euro for the energy sector. And we just launched a call for projects for 950 megawatt, in which which will be financed through a support scheme of around 475 million euro at the disposal of the investors. And next year we'll launch also the modernization fund, which will be a very generous fund with budget up to 1.2 billion euro per year, available budget for investments in low carbon emission generation capacity. So renewable also will be very much interesting from the point of view of the investors. These are efforts that we are deploying into easily and smoothly phasing out coal on our path to the green transition, and on our path, because my colleague talked about floods and fires, and along the path to decouple the economic growth that Romania is securing in this period nowadays through the emissions of carbon. So we want to maintain this economic growth, but decouple it with emissions, and this can only be done with green technologies.
You've already mentioned some EU funding, and I actually wanted to come back to that a little bit later, but maybe I can sort of bring forward that question. Romania, being the EU member state for a number of years now, has the access to EU funding that is not necessarily available to other countries in the region. What's your lessons learned in terms of effective utilization of those funds and making sure that the strategy that is the basis for making these funds available is getting the right buy-in from the politicians, but also from the society in Romania?
Our job is to provide a stable environment, a healthy environment for investments. And I think that through this mechanisms, we should be able to achieve this and to provide for the investors the stable framework and predictability in order for them to have their mind only on their gaining back from their investments. For our energy system, of course, this is a boost, because in our process of trying to find solutions in the energy crisis, and the high prices of energy, and every investments in new capacities of producing energy, I think, in my opinion, is the healthy way in reducing the bills of energy. And of course, we have to put in the center of our energy system the consumers, because without the consumers, even if we talk about domestic consumer or non-domestic consumers, any other investments will not be of use.
We have had already a lot about the role the gas is going to play in energy transition. And I think it would be interesting to hear from the Romanian perspective about gas. But I think it's even more interesting and tricky, in a way, to ask that question to a minister representing North Macedonia. Now, we've heard earlier during this conference about the project of building the interconnection between North Macedonia and Greece. What is your view on the role of gas in the decarbonization of North Macedonia, but also region in general? And why gas still does matter in your country?
Well, little did we know a few years ago when we decided that we're going to invest a lot of money into the gas network in our country. Well, actually, did we know that the crisis that's happening today is going to happen? However, though, gas still does matter, and it will matter for the future. We openly saying we rely 100% on Russian gas. Currently, we're vying for other options. We're trying to secure gas from our neighboring countries or through the network, the grids that we have. We have currently the interconnector with Bulgaria. Is the only connection we have, and that's how we used to receive the gas until now. We're in the final phases, hopefully going to sign the agreement latest by the end of the year with Greece to build the interconnector between us and them. It's planned to take approximately maximum 2 years. We're hoping that we'll finish it before the winter of 2024. We are also co-investing in a LNG port in Alexandroupoli in Greece to secure the quantities of gas for our own country. I think it's a must. To actually give you an oversight of my country's energy production facilities. We are net importers of energy, of electricity as well, unfortunately. We've had a good relationship with the neighbors, so we've had a balanced collaboration with them. Approximately 70 to 75% we produce ourselves. Unfortunately, of that 70 to 75%, we use coal. We have committed to actually decommission those coal-fired power plants. Initially, the plan was between 28 to 29, but latest 2030. Unfortunately, with the events that are taking place now, we are moving it back by 2030. That falls in very strategically very well for us because we're going to actually utilize all the potential lignite we have in the next 7 years or so in our country. But gas is a must if we want to transition away from coal, achieve the targets that were set for 2030, and if we're going to end by 2050 to go carbon neutral as the rest of us. Regionally, though, it is important for every single one of them. Serbia is joining on board. We actually yesterday, our delegation was in Belgrade discussing the potential interconnector between North Macedonia and Serbia. Because the interconnector with Greece is going to have a capacity of 2.8 BCM. We don't need to utilize all of it. We could be a transit country for them as well and a potential future source. However, because you mentioned for the region, I think the key here is when we're speaking about energy strategy, and we're speaking about countries like mine and other countries in the region, which were smaller and don't have a population of, I'm not going to even try and compare ourselves to Romania, it's a different country and different size, we need to create a regional energy strategy. We have different needs at different times, at different seasons. We shouldn't actually be concentrating on ourselves. Yes, we should be concentrating on not having one source, being dependent on one source, which can get that source can be disturbed like we have it today, and now we're all running around trying to find other potential sources. However, if we create a regional strategy in the country, in our region, between Serbia, Albania, Montenegro, Bulgaria, and Greece included, these are EU members and EU candidate members, I think we're going to be better equipped for the future to actually be better prepared when we do have these, should we have future shocks in the future. And it's a must that we have come to an agreement, because if one thinks that North Macedonia is going to invest a lot in gas, just for us as a market, economically it's never that viable. If we do it because we know that Kosovo will be joining us maybe tomorrow, or Serbia will be connecting to our grid, we see it as economically viable. And the same thing goes for solar, of course, because we need to create a proper balancing of the renewable energy in the region.
That's a great line on the cross-border cooperation, collaboration, joint strategy, etc. I mean, we're all facing similar challenges, and doing it together makes perfect sense. Now, I wouldn't like to be too rude, so I want to go back to my gas question and ask Mr. Niculescu about not necessarily the domestic gas production potential, but what you do in Romania in the context of practically marrying gas and renewables. And I'm sort of thinking about the Oltenia transaction, Oltenia deal. Would you be able to share with us a little bit more details about this particular transaction and how it can, in a very efficient way, address the issue of decarbonization and expansion of renewables, please?
Actually, this is part of the phasing out call I was talking earlier. Phasing out coal and replacing these installed capacities of coal burning with gas turbines, and Oltenia is one of these examples. Actually, Romania, you should know, that is the second largest producer of natural gas in the European Union. We are producing more than, or around 80–85% of our total consumption, so we are depending on imports for only a small quantity of natural gas. We are fortunate regarding this aspect. In June, we started the production in a gas deposit in the Black Sea, operated by a foreign company, Black Sea Oil and Gas. This will add to our production 1 billion cubic meter per year, so it's more stability for our... I'm making an overview, and then I will be resuming to your question, hoping that we will be able to start the production in the Neptune Deep deposit in the Black Sea, which is very large, and in collaborations with the company OMV Petrom and Romgaz, the national company of gas from Romania, we will start producing gas also from this deposit. Coming back to your questions, of course, that these quantities of gas that Romania possesses should be used for internal use, of course, in a way to finance this transition to a greener economy, but also to provide to the... Because we were speaking about collaboration, I think that through the interconnectors that Romania possesses, Romania can become a regional player in the gas sector. Oltenia is making good steps in switching this coal-producing facility to gas, and not only gas, we plan to put in Oltenia also renewable. We are speaking about 750 megawatt of photovoltaic project. So coupling together gas with renewable seems nowadays a good combination in order to secure our energy system in Romania.
And I think this transaction really has a potential of becoming a European landmark, not just for the reasons you've mentioned, but also because it's being constructed on the side of the decommissioned coal mine. So a just transition element,
yes,
is hugely important and impactful as well.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. And well, I've promised early on during our discussion that we will spend a little bit of time on private sector investments in renewables. I think, and we do talk about it with AIDA from time to time. One of the very visible differences between the two regions we respectively cover is that in the European region we tend to work much more and much more often with private sector to pushing the renewables. So I was just wondering that in the context of North Macedonia, I mean, what are the important factors for attraction of investors, private investors, foreign investors, to renewables, which, by the way, seems to be absolutely necessary for ability to meet the ambitious goals that we've discussed earlier? So how do you want to attract, or what are you doing to attract private sector investors?
I think we need to, first of all, be more open, transparent, and business-friendly, as you want to call it. We ourselves, we know that we have a certain capability or capacity to invest ourselves. I mean, we have a few agreements with EBRD, where we're investing our own state-owned company, energy producer. ESM is investing into photovoltaics. We've built already 10 megawatt. We're looking to the next 30 to be built with financing from EBRD. However, at the same time, we know that our needs are a lot larger than that. One of the main projects that I'm going to talk about is the hydropower plant on the Black River, as it's called. The name is Chebren. Unfortunately, my country in the past has not been successful in placing this on the market. This year round, we've actually gone approached it differently. Actually, no, sorry, over the last 2 years, because this process has actually been for 2 years. This is a PPP agreement with the international company. We had 8 very large international companies who showed interest, and some of them actually put an offer in at the end. We will be actually step in there as a joint venture partner with an international investor. We're trying to create the possibilities. We know that it's a must for us to have the investors, the private sector. We ourselves don't have the appropriate funding to do that, nor do we have in our debt to GDP, of course, is actually raising as everyone else is raising. So the idea is actually to sit down there. So we have the PPP models, and in some other instances, we're actually going on tendering for PPAs, where we're offering state-owned land, we build the connectivity, and the idea is that we get to take the best offer on a price power agreement. This is what as I said earlier, we're realistic. We know we're not going to achieve the targets ourselves, so we're actually being very supportive and open to speak to international companies, potential investors who have, I have to point out, the appropriate references, because we want to have companies which have the experience of managing the installations in the long run. Right now, as I said, the hydropower plant that we're looking at is going to, combined with our own contribution, will be over 450 megawatts. Hydropower plant. Further on, we have a private company which is looking to invest up to 415 megawatt in wind power. And currently, we actually lined up, as I said, we have potential co-investments from the private sector for about approximately 800 megawatts in solar. Now, these might not sound big numbers when I'm listening to my dear colleague, the Deputy Minister from Turkey, who's talking in gigawatt, but for our country, these are very large numbers, and this is the way we're going to achieve our ambitions.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, agree, scale does matter, but has to be put in the context of the size of the country, the economy, etc. Now, one of the ways of scaling up renewables that is being talked about a lot recently is offshore wind. And no, I'm not going to ask that question
Unfortunately, we
to
don't.
a landlocked country, but in Romania, we see discussions of offshore in the Baltic Sea. We see, with the advancement of floating offshore wind technology, we see discussions in Greece, Albania, Croatia. In fact, in Greece, there's a very detailed work on putting together a framework for support of offshore wind. What's the view of Romania in terms of offshore wind and the potential it can bring for decarbonization of energy sectors?
Let me say that it's a huge interest for offshore wind, both from the government and from the authorities, and also from the investors. And to underline this, I want to say that I have been in Bilbao this year for the Wind Energy Summit, where I had the chance to see the latest technology and floating offshore wind. and get in touch with companies that wanted to come to invest to Romania. Also went to Copenhagen in order to discuss and to see best practices in applying the legislative framework. And also I had the chance to discuss with companies that are interested in coming to Romania and invest in this, in Romania's offshore potential. And in this respect, we started to work on a draft of law for offshore wind, and we are working with the DG competition and with the World Bank, and we launched a roadmap for this draft of law 3 weeks ago, and we are making important steps in order to provide a health environment for investments in the offshore wind. The potential is quite important. A World Bank study shows a theoretical potential of around 70 gigawatts of installed power in the Black Sea. Measurements will have to be made in order to see not only the theoretical potential but the actual potential, and through this legislative framework, and also CFD could be a mechanism that will finance this kind of investments. Of course, one of the challenges is how we will take the energy produced in the Black Sea and transport it where it needs to be consumed, because also in Dobroja area already we've seen that we have limitations. It is a very good wind potential, this area, both onshore and offshore, so congestions may occur. This is why Transelectrica benefited yesterday of around 425 million euros from the modernization fund. The contract was signed yesterday in order to strengthen their capacity of transporting energy, and the challenge is to keep up with the investments in renewable and offshore, in wind offshore, with the investments in transporting. And one of the solutions may be cable that will provide this type of energy from the Black Sea to where it needs to be consumed. We talked about this earlier with the partners from Azerbaijan and Georgia, and maybe this one can be added to the production that Romania already have and will have in the near future.
We probably won't have time to go deeper into it, but that's another fantastic story and potential for acceleration of renewables and decarbonization of energy sectors. Now, by the way, it's not all bad news for North Macedonia. I don't think there is much chance of you gaining an access to your own seaside, but as Bilbao was mentioned, I was actually there as well. I was really, really impressed to see a modern onshore wind turbines with a capacity of 7.2 gigawatts designed specifically for mid-wind conditions. And for me, who remembers, you know, the first onshore wind project that EBRD financed donkeys years back with the machines that was just 800 kilowatts, you know, this is like, you know, 9 times bigger machines. So advancement of technology is also on our side. We will see bigger, more efficient machines that will help us to get to where we need to be. Looking at the watch there, I think this is a time now to open the floor for questions. So if any of you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, introduce yourself with name, position, and affiliation. Please, gentlemen over there.
My name is Serdar Çetinkaya. I'm from the American Embassy in Turkey. Earlier we talked about the energy efficiency. Have you considered energy savings performance contracting? In the United States, the energy efficiency started with energy savings, and there are ESCO companies, which is energy saving companies. What they do is they study a plant, let's say, and they detect what are the best places to increase the efficiency For example, changing electric motors, for example, changing water pumps or other things which could be replaced with more efficient electric motors or pumps. As a result, you come out with a saving. In a year, they may say, okay, you are paying so much amount of price for electricity or water, and if you do this project, you will gain about 20% savings. So if you promise to give that to us, we will do the project without you paying anything. And then as a result, you pay that difference to that ESCO company, and that company does the banking with the banks, and then come out with a project. So this is a way of, instead of subsidizing, you could do energy savings performance contracting by changing laws and regulations. I don't know if you've considered this kind of things in your countries.
Thank you. Okay, I'll start it off then. Ashley, we've gone even a further drastic step in energy saving. We've turned all the lights off in the office, by the way. Unfortunately, that's how far we're going in our country. Yes, because we have a serious scarcity when it comes to that. But actually, yes, we have. We've changed our laws to actually allow the ESCOs to be active in our country. And there are a few municipalities, and it's mainly the municipalities that are currently working together with some ESCO companies and are implementing them. Not all of them fully understand it yet, because it's a new concept for a lot of the mayors to actually understand what it means to sign over the public lighting or other kind of management. The next step would be potentially, but I'm not sure that is the step that any will not fully decide as a country yet. Do we give the public buildings to ESCOs as well? That's also another step. That's a step that's gone. I mean, I'm not sure if there's any countries that are doing that in public buildings just yet. But no, as in regards to the municipalities, public lighting, etc., we have already changed the laws to allow ESCOs to be active in our country. And we look forward to anyone who would be interested in that and would introduce them to our municipalities. Because unfortunately, the case in my country is we still use, we use the old lamps in some municipalities, and currently one of the biggest issues, which I'm sure a lot of other countries have in municipalities, the electricity bills are skyrocketing, and they do not know how to continue to manage the utility companies.
Also in Romania, due to the energy high prices, saving is a measure of controlling these energy bills. And beside the ESCO contracts, which we know very well, we have implemented as measures of energy efficiency a program called Electric Up, in which we are providing for 100 kilowatt installed power of PV panels around 100,000 euro per company. So it is 100% financed for decreasing the energy bill by installing, and we have several measures like this. In order to reduce the consume, we put in the energy bill the concept of prosumer, and we very clearly specified that prosumers up to 200 kilowatt installed power should have the possibility to compensate quantitative their energy consumption with their energy production in order to facilitate their access to the grid and lowering the bills. And yes, we are making a lot of changes in order to put more of this energy efficiency into for population and for companies.
Thank you. Any other question from the floor, please? If not, or maybe there is going to be one in a second, I would just come with a very, very last question from my side. And I would like to go back to what Aida has briefly mentioned in the context of European Commission's interpretation of Repower EU and this big push on replace, renew and reuse. The renew, i.e. Pushing forward large-scale deployment of renewables, comes into a face-to-face collision with a number of issues. Availability of turbines and solar panels is one. Financing increasingly also is the subject that is being discussed. But one of the elements that I hear day in, day out from especially private sector renewable energy investors is the permitting. They say that the permitting in our region, and I'm not going to finger point to anyone, is generally extremely investor unfriendly. It takes, in certain countries, up to 10 years to develop an onshore wind farm with all the wind measurements, bird measurements, butt measurements, and grid connections, etc. Two quick questions. A, do you agree that this is really a concern? And if yes, do your governments believe that there need to be any actions or any concrete steps to address that concern?
Can I let the EU member speak first?
I would do the same, actually.
Of course, there is room for improvement. Of course, measures can be taken in order to cut down bureaucracy, but not only in permitting renewable. Bureaucracy is a problem not only in Romania, but all over Europe. It's the same problem, and all over European Union, may I say. So every member state is doing its own in order to cut down bureaucracy and providing access to permitting faster, because nowadays situation imposes a faster reaction to investments. It's not the case for Romania for a 10 years long permitting period. As I told you earlier, we have experience with permitting and investments in renewables. We did it quite in a fast way rather than other countries in the European Union, but of course there is room for improvement. It needs to be a general framework that comes not only for permitting in sense of energy, but also as a construction, because there are many aspects that are related to local authorities, which are providing permitting for construction, permitting for environment. It's not only the permitting for the energy use of that construction, of that building, it's also the local authorities that should understand and to reach out to the investors in order to cut down the bureaucracy.
I agree with my dear colleague. I mean, I can't speak in regards to the Repower EU because we are still on the side. As you know, we have been a candidate country for the last 17 years. Finally, this year we managed to hold our first IGC, which is, we're very happy that we're finally on the right path to the EU accession process. Yes, unfortunately, as my dear colleague mentioned, there's bureaucracy everywhere. There's red tape and a lot of things, because it doesn't just rely from the central government. There's also the local government that wants to deal with when it comes to the permitting. And unfortunately, sometimes certain self-governments don't fully understand the urgency, nor the fact that it has to be the importance of it. What we're trying to do is we're trying to actually cut what we can from a central government aspect. We're trying to cut some of the red tape in regards to permitting. And when it comes to solar, we're trying to make it as a temporary construction. It's not a construction anymore, to actually make a temporary construction, thereby making it a lot easier to receive the permits. When it comes to the wind, now, I think we all have experience with this. And as I said earlier, we became an EU candidate a while back, and we have harmonized quite a lot of our laws with the EU directives. Now you have the Bird and Habitats Directive, which obliges you to do a study for 12 months, which is only understandable considering we're looking at it from an environmental point of view. And sometimes, yes, investors want to get things done quicker. Unfortunately, the study itself will take 12 months. The evaluation will take even longer. And unfortunately, it's not just the bureaucracy created by the governments, but there are certain rules and regulations that the EU requests us to do it. And us not even being a member yet, I'm not criticizing, by the way, we want to be a member of the EU. What I'm trying to say is there are certain, well, it's not just in our countries, but it is the way the process has been created.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for these answers. I'm glad you went into the way of bureaucracy. That was a safer answer than anything else. But I think this is the element of renewable energy acceleration that really has to be looked into to help private sector to do their job. Very last chance to ask a question. But if nothing comes now, we'll have a chance to answer your personal question into one-to-one environment over coffee. Yes, I would like to introduce you to a 30 minutes coffee break and ask you to be here at 3:30 for the next panel titled Clean Energy Technologies and Financing Mechanisms. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for my panelists. A round of applause for you. Thank you very much.